In the mid-12th century, after a brief period of uneasy peace, a cold wind from the east blew across the seas and swept over the plains of Europe. In the winter of 1145, that wind carried dark news to Pope Eugenius III. The city of Edessa had fallen. Once the crown jewel of the Crusader kingdoms, symbolizing the first great triumph of the First Crusade, Edessa had now been lost to the Muslims, taken by the sword of Zengi, a ruthless and ambitious military commander. From the shadows of the papal tower in Viterbo, where Eugenius resided after losing control of Rome, the Pope took up his pen. He composed a document that would shake the continent, the papal bull, Quantum Predecessoris. It was not a call to arms for glory, but for salvation, for the defense of the Holy Land and what remained of Christian hope in the East. At that very moment in the West, a young king, Louis VII of France, was tormented by guilt over the burning of a church filled with civilians during his campaign in Vitry. Unable to shake the burden of sin, Louis vowed to go to the Holy Land, not only to seek forgiveness, but to redeem himself through action. The Pope's call reached him on Christmas Day. To Louis, it was a sign from God. He did not hesitate. At Bourges, with his renowned wife Eleanor of Aquitaine at his side, Louis declared his intention to take up the cross. But to turn this declaration into reality would take more than faith. It would require the support of an entire kingdom, and that was no simple task. At Easter 1146, in the sacred grounds of Saint-Denis, nobles, knights, and clergy gathered. Among them stood Bernard of Clairvaux, the fiery preacher considered the voice of God in his time. He did not speak of gold, glory, or conquest. He spoke of guilt, of shame, and of the sacred oaths sworn by their ancestors. His words moved thousands to their knees, tears shining in candlelight, and so the great journey began. From across Europe, armies were raised. Not only did King Louis VII join the cause, but so did Conrad III, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. For the first time in Crusader history, reigning monarchs would personally lead their armies to the Holy Land. Hope soared. This would be a righteous campaign, led by kings and guided by God himself. In 1147, the German army under Conrad III, accompanied by papal legate Cardinal Theodowin, marched toward Constantinople to meet the French. Along the way, they were joined by Ottokar III of Styria, and even Conrad's rival, King Geza II of Hungary, allowed them to pass unhindered. But when 20,000 Germans entered Byzantine territory, Emperor Manuel I Komnenos grew uneasy. He feared the Crusaders as potential invaders, not allies, and stationed troops to guard the roads. On September 10, 1147, the Germans reached Constantinople. But instead of being welcomed as fellow Christians, tensions between Conrad and Manuel escalated. A brief battle broke out near the city, after which the Germans resolved to move into Anatolia without delay. Manuel asked Conrad to leave troops to help defend against Roger II of Sicily, an opportunist raiding Greek cities, but Conrad refused. Crossing the Bosporus into Asia, Conrad chose to march inland toward Iconium, capital of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. Believing imperial authority still held sway in Anatolia, he split his army. He took the knights and elite troops through the treacherous interior, while his half-brother Bishop Otto of Freising led the non-combatants along the coast. Disaster followed. On October 25, 1147, near Dorylaeum, the site of a former Crusader triumph, Conrad's army was ambushed. The Turks used familiar tactics, feigned retreat, luring the German cavalry into a trap, then returning with full force. The German army was nearly annihilated. Once again, Dorylaeum became a graveyard of Crusader dreams. Wounded, Conrad ordered a retreat to Constantinople. Harassed constantly by Turkish forces, his men were killed off in small groups. Meanwhile, Otto's contingent, cut off from Conrad, fared no better. In November, near Laodicea, his starving, exhausted army was ambushed. Most were killed or enslaved. The German crusade was shattered before even glimpsing Jerusalem. At the same time, the French crusaders departed from Metz, led by Louis VII, accompanied by notable lords such as Thierry of Alsace, Renaud of Bar, Amadeus III of Savoy, and his half-brother William of Montferrat and William of Auvergne. Additional forces came from Lorraine, Brittany, Burgundy, Aquitaine, and Normandy. Another contingent from Provence, under Alphonse of Toulouse, would sail later. In Worms, Louis joined up with Anglo-Norman crusaders. The journey was mostly peaceful until Louis allowed Boris Kalamanos, a failed Hungarian usurper, to join the march, provoking outrage from King Geza II. In Byzantine lands, relations remained tense. Haunted by memories of the First Crusade's plundering, Emperor Manuel viewed the French warily. He even signed a truce with the Seljuk Sultan Mesud I to focus on defending Constantinople. Though Louis was received in splendor, suspicions lingered. Some French knights, outraged by the emperor's alliance with the Muslims, suggested attacking Constantinople with help from Roger II, but Louis held them back. When the armies of Savoy, Auvergne, and Montferrat arrived via Italy, the French crossed the Bosporus and entered Anatolia without Byzantine aid. Manuel made Louis swear an oath to return any conquered territory to the empire. At Lopateion, they met the remnants of Conrad's battered army. The two monarchs marched on together toward Ephesus, staying near the coast. In December they arrived, warned of imminent Turkish attacks. Louis ignored the warnings, and though Manuel sent envoys complaining of French pillaging, the French pressed on. Conrad, now ill, returned to Constantinople, where Manuel personally cared for him. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 1147, the Battle of Ephesus began. The Turks ambushed in darkness, but the French, prepared, won decisively. Later that month, they repelled another ambush near the Meander River. In January 1148, they reached Laodicea, where Otto's forces had recently been slaughtered. At Mount Cadmus, the French vanguard under Amadeus of Savoy became separated and was ambushed. Louis reportedly climbed a rock to escape, spared only because the Turks didn't recognize him. The French army, battered and starving, pushed on to Italia. There, with no food or forage and under constant harassment, Louis decided to go by sea to Antioch. But storms delayed the fleet. When few ships arrived, Louis and his nobles took them for themselves, abandoning most of the army to a perilous overland march, where many perished. On March 19, 1148, Louis arrived in Antioch. Amadeus of Savoy had died in Cyprus en route. Prince Raymond of Poitiers, Eleanor's uncle, greeted them warmly. He hoped Louis would help defend the city and join a campaign against Aleppo, the key to retaking Edessa. But Louis refused, preferring to complete his pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Eleanor, enjoying her time in Antioch, grew close to Raymond, sparking rumors of an affair. Raymond urged her to stay and even suggested divorcing Louis. Tensions between the royal couple deepened. Unable to control the situation, Louis left Antioch abruptly, taking Eleanor with him like a prisoner. At the same time, Otto of Freising's survivors and Emperor Conrad arrived in Jerusalem. Patriarch Fulk invited Louis to join the remaining Crusader leaders. The fleet that had passed through Lisbon arrived, along with Alfonso Jordan of Toulouse, who died mysteriously at Caesarea, allegedly poisoned by his nephew Raymond II of Tripoli, fearing political rivalry. Originally, the crusade aimed to retake Edessa. But when leaders convened in Jerusalem, they turned their sights on Damascus, a wealthy and strategic city. King Baldwin III and the Knights Templar supported this shift, hoping it would open Syria to Christian control. In Damascus, the regent Mu'in ad-Din Unur braced for war, reinforcing defenses, diverting water sources, and calling on rival Muslim rulers in Aleppo and Mosul for aid. They delayed, hoping Unur might lose the city. In July 1148, three great armies, led by Louis, Conrad, and Baldwin, marched east toward Damascus. At first, all went well. They reached the city's western gardens in just 2 days. But internal divisions soon unraveled their progress. French and German leaders argued over who would rule Damascus. The Jerusalem faction wanted a buffer state. Others distrusted each other. Greed and jealousy fractured the alliance. On the third day, they shifted their attack to the more fortified southeast. This tactical blunder exposed them to scorching heat and cut them off from water. The Muslims counterattacked fiercely, harassing Crusader supply lines. Morale collapsed. After 4 days, the Crusaders retreated in disorder. Damascus, so close to capture, slipped through their fingers. The Second Crusade had ended in failure. Its military defeat was compounded by spiritual disillusionment. Back in Europe, the news shocked the faithful. Pope Eugenius III, who had once hoped for triumph, now faced a crisis of credibility. Nobles began to question the value of crusading. Common folk, who had sent sons and husbands to die, lost faith in promises of heavenly reward. Bernard of Clairvaux, once the voice of God's cause, was now condemned as a false prophet. Though he wrote letters blaming the Crusades' failure on human sin, his reputation never recovered. The Second Crusade, conceived in hope, ended in bitterness. Where it had sought redemption, it brought only division, despair, and a trail of graves across Europe and the Holy Land.
Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this content and found it interesting, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos.